हाँ जी सर. Thank you so much, sir. So I think we'll start, and I'll start with my slide sharing. So my slide is visible. Okay. So uh, today we'll be talking about COVID-19 management. So I have been given 40 minutes. It'll take an hour, I believe. And as we go down the slides, there is a family by the name of Ashi who will be helping us understand the slide and navigate through the whole program. We are in the midst of a huge COVID crisis at this point of time, and a lot of questions are coming up in various groups. I see various WhatsApp groups. People are asking questions, and in fact, I told them, okay, attend this presentation. You'll get an answer to a lot of those questions. So, with that in mind, we like to start with the presentation. Slide change नहीं हो रही. हाँ, चलो. So, what is our aim in COVID-19 management? First of all, we have to classify patients high risk versus low risk. And then what is happening is that what we want to catch the patients before the saturation is below 94%. And what is happening, most of our patients are coming कि डॉक्टर साहब आईसीयू दिला दो, अभी रूम एयर पे 80% सैचुरेशन है, और ऑक्सीजन सिलेंडर से घर पे लगा रखा है कॉन्सेंट्रेटर से, वहाँ पे 91 92 आ रहा है. So our aim is to catch preempt this illness, to catch these patients before they reach this situation of saturation below 94%. Then we have to know what are the essentials of home care and ward care. So what all facilities should be available to a patient we are keeping at home. Then the use of antiviral drugs, remdesivir, the way it is being black marketed across the country, the way demands are coming up from all sorts of people कि कहीं से रेमडेसिविर दिला दो, कहीं से टोसी दिला दो. And other than that, use of steroids, when to start steroids, how much to give, what protocol to follow when we want to use steroids, and what kind of steroids to use. So, the case which we will be discussing, most of them are real cases which we are facing in life. So, now, if we look at the patients, what is the spectrum of COVID-19 patients who require treatment? Most common is the asymptomatic acute COVID infection. They are picked up on random testing, which is going on across the city. Otherwise, they have no symptoms. Like a diabetic 56-year-old male was sitting outside my wife's OPD, and on testing, he was found to be positive. He had no symptoms. He was diabetic, he was obese, but he was hale and hearty, no issues at all. Another group is those presenting with acute COVID, URIs. These are low risk patients like me. I had a URI, I had some fever, some malaise, but no dyspnea. So, what is the treatment for me? No treatment as such. Then there is another group which is high risk without hypoxemia. The ones who are comorbid, we will discuss what are the comorbidities which we have to take care of, and do they require active treatment, do they require antibodies, do they require antivirals. We'll discuss down the presentation. And the most important, and the ones which are in a lot of trouble, are the acute COVID pneumonias, which are the lower respiratory tract infections, and the ones who are presenting with hypoxia. So early recognition and treatment with remdesivir, enoxaparin, and steroids, as we'll be discussing down the presentation. So now we come to a family of six. Let's call the family as the family of Ashi, and all the members of the family were obese. One is 77-year-old male, diabetes, suffering from diabetes mellitus. He's come to us with symptoms on day 6, body ache, weakness, and his HbA1c is 6 gram percent. Another is 72-year-old female, again diabetes mellitus. She is presenting with fifth day of illness, body ache, fever, HbA1c is not available. Another is 57-year-old female, diabetes mellitus, day 9 of fever, HbA1c 8.4. The third one is 50-year-old female, 8th day symptomatic, and 8th day and is asymptomatic. Next is 46-year-old female, 7th day, just pain in throat. And the last one is 55-year-old female, 9th day, no symptoms. So now what is the aim when this family comes to us? Our aim is risk stratification. Whom to treat, where to treat, how much to treat, what drugs to give, what investigations to do, and how to decide that these are high risk cases. So that is the aim of our present. That is the aim of our treatment. Just a moment, I'll just reshare the screen. Okay, you can welcome sir for a moment. So, I uh, so I continue. Yeah, sir. Thank you. So, where to treat? Now we have three or four possibilities where to keep our patients. One is low risk, which goes for home monitoring. The high risk ones, these are the asymptomatic ones, and they can also be kept at home, or they may be kept at COVID care center. So nowadays we are keeping them at home. The high risk symptomatics, they should ideally go to a hospital, but looking at the available manpower and resources, these are also being cared at home. And high risk symptomatic with saturation less than 95%, they should ideally go to a hospital with an ICU backup. So now what are the high risk situations we are talking about? High risks are age more than 50 years, comorbidities, obesity, diabetes, family history of death due to acute COVID, and male sex. And what are the high risk symptoms? These are the symptoms which have to be kept in mind whenever we talk to a COVID patient, whenever we take a history of a COVID patient. If there is persistent fever for more than 5 days, if there is high grade fever more than 102 degrees Fahrenheit beyond 2 days, if there are chills and rigors, breathlessness, or biphasic fever, that is return of fever after 5 days. And what are the investigations which we are interested in, which we'll be discussing later on? So, in these investigations, we normally look at rising inflammatory markers and significant chest infiltrates in radiology. And of course, if there is hypoxemia, that is drop of SpO2 below 94%. So now let us continue with our cases. The three cases: 50-year-old female who was asymptomatic, 46-year-old female who had a mild sore throat, and 55-year-old female, again no symptoms. All these were kept for home care, just simply observation, nothing more than that. And we have another group, the remaining three: 77-year-old male diabetic with symptoms, 72-year-old female diabetic with fever, and 57-year-old diabetic with fever again. These have to be watched closely. What do we watch for? Oxygenation and inflammatory markers like CRP, D dimers, ferritin, CBC, KFT, and LFT. So now, what are the home care prerequisites? What do we look at? What do we really want to see in a patient who's at home? First of all, he should have a written management policy, an emergency plan as to when to report to a hospital, which hospital to report, monitoring, and follow up. He should have a pulse oximeter at home. There should be a caregiver available at home, a person who is educated or at least able to understand the patient's problems and communicate with the doctor. There should be a nearby health facility which should be known to the patient where he can go at the time of need, and there should be facility of home collection of investigations. Then there should be a isolation facility at home, a separate washroom. Then anxiety should be controllable. It should not be that bad that the patient is not able to sleep, and because of anxiety is feeling breathless or is on the verge of depression. Then he should have an oxygen cylinder, an emergency cylinder available somewhere, and some kind of steroid if needed available at home. Ideally, we should avoid uncontrolled diabetic with obesity for home care. But this is an ideal situation. Normally, all these patients are now being managed at home itself. So details required for management plan, monitoring, age, sex and comorbidity, SpO2 at rest, after walking, 6-minute walk, symptoms, what are the symptoms like fever, breathlessness, investigations, if any of them have been done, they should be arranged in a chart serial wise, and treatment, if anything is being given, what is the treatment being given and what are the dosages. So this is the chart, a rough chart which should be maintained for each patient, which has breathlessness, SpO2, SpO2 after 6-minute walks, CRP, D-dimer, steroid with dosages, and drugs, whatever are being given. And these are as per day. You can see it is as per days mentioned there. So now, what do? We have some evidence. A lot of data is coming up from across the world, and there is some experience which we have in Indian settings. Some examples we'll take, and family of Ashi will be with us, and along with this we will move down and try to discuss some recommendations. So management. In management, we'll first discuss pathogenesis, then diagnosis and monitoring, and then finally treatment. So now, what do we understand about pathogenesis? On the day of onset of symptoms, that is day 1, viral replication is at its peak, and before that, so 1 to 3 days before day 1, the patient is already having viremia and is pre-symptomatic but excreting the virus. Then this viral replication, as we see, decreases, but the viral debris starts increasing. Along with that, there is a delayed innate immunity which starts from day 1 until day 7. There is this immunity which is active, and this immunity can get dysregulated. There can be inflammatory response and inflammatory coagulopathy. So this will start from day 7 and will extend up to day 14, and then after that we have either chronic lung disease or a hyperinflammatory syndrome, which is in post-COVID state and not very common. So now, what are the common symptoms of COVID? Headache, congestion or running nose, new loss of taste or smell, cough, sore throat, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, fatigue, body ache, chills and rigors with fever, nausea, vomiting and diarrhea. So this nausea, vomiting and diarrhea, which earlier last year was seen a lot with children, is now being seen in a lot of adults also. And other extra pulmonary manifestations, just to complete the list: dizziness, encephalopathy, Guillain-Barré syndrome, myalgia, anosmia, stroke, dermatologic, petechiae, urticaria, livedo reticularis, vesicles, erythematous rash, cardiac, you can have cardiomyopathy, myocarditis, cardiac arrhythmias, cardiogenic shock, myocardial ischemia, endocrine hyperglycemia, DKA, gastrointestinal diarrhea I've talked about, abdominal pain. My friend had severe abdominal pain last year in COVID, thromboembolism, a problem, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, catheter related thrombosis, hepatic, elevated ALT, AST, this I have presently. Bilirubin is normal, although elevated bilirubin, renal, acute kidney injury, proteinuria, hematuria. So all of these can present in a patient with COVID-19. So now, when we talk about COVID-19 investigations, there are three modalities which we look for. One is the virus, second is inflammation, and third is pneumonia. So in the virus, we are doing RT-PCR, rapid antigen, Feluda paper strip test, and antibody test. I won't be discussing this further because the patients who come to us are already RT-PCR positive, or this is the modality which is easily available for us, RT-PCR, rapid antigen, and they come with test report to us. Inflammation. This is a modality which is to be used carefully. We have blood counts, CRP, ferritin, D-dimer, and IL-6, and LDH. Pneumonia, we have chest X-ray, I'll discuss this, and HRCT. So now, what is the role of blood tests in management of COVID? So in COVID, basically there is an inflammation, there is a prothrombotic state, and there is a macrophage activation syndrome. All of these together ultimately give rise to a illness which is life threatening to most of our patients. So our aim is to predict and monitor this disease. So if we are able to predict these early on and start treatment, a lot of our patients will not go to hypoxia and will not lose their lives. So for thrombophilic state, D dimer is an important parameter for us. Early pulmonary involvement is seen by CRP and ferritin. Late pulmonary inflammatory pathology is seen by CRP mainly, and late pulmonary or macrophage activation syndrome is found by raised ferritin levels. Now we come to the tests which are available to us. Neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. So when we look at the report, we find that neutrophils are 95% and lymphocytes are 5%. So we can take out a ratio which is known as NL ratio, and less than 4.5 predicts less severe disease with 82% sensitivity, and greater than 6.5% predicts mortality with 83% sensitivity. So it is an important parameter of mortality and morbidity in a lot of our patients. But alone LR ratio should not be considered as a major risk factor. It should combine with other factors as we discuss down the line. Along with that, once steroids are started, these ratios get altered and counts get elevated. C-reactive protein. So this is an inflammatory marker which should be done after day 5. So day 5 onwards, if symptoms persist in high risk individuals, this has to be done. Day 1 as baseline after symptom onset is usually not recommended. When is CRP significant? Any CRP more than 70 milligram per liter is associated with a low oxygen level and is usually a severe disease. Other than that, CRP is still 20, we are not very worried. But yes, over 20, it implies that there is an ongoing inflammation which requires management. Besides that, it is the trend of CRP with persistence of symptoms which should be considered significant. So we are more interested in what is the trend of CRP rather than a single value. So now this is a 40-year-old male who presented to us, who was having fever for 10 days and was admitted for last 3 days. He's been given Dexona 6 milligram BD and has chest X-ray infiltrates. In the morning, he is found to be hypoxic on 10 liters of oxygen. He shifted to ICU and HFNC. CRP was negative, but D dimers were elevated 642, interleukin 6 IL-6 was 30, and SGPT was 220, ferritin was 735. What does this imply? Look at the X-ray. We can see consolidation and infiltrates on both the sides. So alone CRP should not be relied upon. In a lot of patients, you may get it normal, but other markers are elevated. Therefore, we have a panel of investigations, panel of inflammatory markers, which we are using. Another is D-dimer. The normal reference range of D-dimer is 400 nanogram per ml or zero point 0.4 microgram per ml. So D-dimer value on admission greater than 2 mics per ml could effectively predict in-hospital mortality of COVID-19 patients with a sensitivity of 92% and specificity of 83%. D-dimer usually we use to titrate our anticoagulant therapy. D-dimer levels may be elevated in settings of pregnancy, inflammation, malignancy, trauma, post-surgical treatment, liver disease, and heart disease. And false positive, it may be found in lipemia, a high triglyceride level, elevated bilirubin level, elevated serum rheumatoid factor levels, or hemolysis. Another important thing is it should be transported to the laboratory within 3 hours. So what is happening is a lot of collection centers are collecting blood samples and sending them off en bulk after 6 to 8 hours. So the reports will come which will not be reflecting the true status of the patient. So if this is not possible, ideally they should be kept on dry ice. The serum should be separated and it should be kept on dry ice, so which is not usually available. So ideally these samples should be given to a laboratory directly. Interleukin 6 does not always correspond to CRP, which is it is produced by hepatocytes in response to IL-6. So CRP is produced by hepatocytes in response to IL-6, and the please mute yourself, sir. Please mute yourself. Please mute yourself. Yeah, thank you. So normal level is below 7 picogram per ml, And interleukin 6 over 25 picogram per ml is an independent risk factor for progression to severe disease and in hospital mortality. And IL-6 of greater than 80 picogram per ml in combination with CRP of 97 milligram per liter is highly predictive of respiratory failure. So again, IL-6 levels rising trend, especially more than 3 times, is more important. So basically, any IL-6 level, the normal level is 7. So if you have a patient with level of 10, 12, 14, we are not very worried. But anything above 20 is important, and it implies that there are chances of a complicated disease and a chance of a patient going into hypoxia. So now we have another patient, a 56-year-old male. This male deteriorated on day 13. He had fever on day 13, and then progressive hypoxia developed on day 15. So when we charted his investigations, this is what we get. The CRP seemed normal till day 11. On day 14, there was a sudden jump in CRP. D dimers were elevated, but they remained the same, constant but elevated. Yes. Ferritin was borderline within range. LDH again borderline within range. Procal we had one value which is normal. Interleukin 6 on day 14 was 32.38, an elevated value. He had fever low grade on day 14, and patient was already receiving enoxaparin, remdesivir and some steroids. The patient, nothing much was done because it was felt it's a low grade fever, just give paracetamol and leave him alone. But if you look at the parameters here, CRP elevated, IL-6 elevated, some action should have been taken, it was not taken, and on day 15 the patient's SpO2 fell down to 93%. So this implies that a trend of CRP and IL-6, these predicted the severe disease before hypoxemia sets in, and remdesivir does not guarantees no pneumonia. Ferritin is a marker of macrophage activity. An increase in ferritin value as a marker of prognostication or predictor, that is thrombosis and diabetes. Ferritin is the last marker to return to normal. So what we find is that if CRP is fallen down, coming back to baseline, and ferritin is still elevated, we are not very worried. We just keep a watch on the ferritin. And again, trends rather than threshold value is more important, and any value below 700 is all right. We are not very concerned. Above 700, yes, it is considered elevated. And rising ferritin level with deranged LFT and developing cytopenias implies macrophage activation syndrome. Then we come to LDH, that is lactate dehydrogenase. This is related to respiratory function, that is PaO2 and FiO2, and it is a predictor of respiratory failure in COVID-19 patients. So there is a strong inverse correlation between LDH and PaO2 FiO2 values. So as LDH rises implies that patient is going into respiratory failure. Again, till 450, below 450 we are not very worried. Above that, it had a sensitivity of 75% and specificity of 70% in recognizing moderate to severe ARDS. Then we come to chest imaging. So this is the most inappropriately used modality, and since last 2 3 days, a lot of controversy is going on WhatsApp and in media regarding this imaging technique. Chest X-ray is the least sensitive, and it is not much recommended in our protocol. HRCT is the most sensitive, and the imaging protocol which is the in thing at this point of time. Ultrasound chest is the least evaluated because maybe it is operator dependent and operator has to go close to the patient, therefore ultrasound chest is not being used much. So now what are the indications of chest imaging? Number one is a patient is RT-PCR negative, but there is a strong clinical suspicion like the family members are positive, or the patient is showing signs and symptoms of COVID, but the RT-PCR is coming persistently negative. Then for differential diagnosis and ruling out complications, for example, in pediatrics, we found a lot of kids who were having RT-PCR positive and were admitted with hypoxia. They on CT scan, it was found that they were suffering from biliary tuberculosis. And but the problem is that it causes a lot of confusion in decision making. So now let us continue with our family of Ashi, and we will see what is going on with the two patients, the ones who are having symptoms. The CRP of the 77-year-old male diabetic day 8 was having cough and weakness was persisting. HbA1c was 6. CRP was 18. Counts were 9,800. Lymphocytes 5. Polys 95. So here we find that NL ratio is disturbed. D dimer was 211. That is within normal range. SpO2 was falling. 95 is not a very happy figure for us. And the other patient, which is 57-year-old female, again diabetes mellitus, day 11. Here fever is persisting. HbA1c is 8.4, CRP is 8, TLC is 12,300, lymphocytes are 34, so polys are around 60%. D dimers are elevated to some extent, but not very high, 982. Now, what to do with this family? So now there are no beds available in the hospital. What are the next steps? Should we start steroids? Should we give antivirals? Should we start anticoagulant? So it was decided that okay, let us do HRCT and see what evidence HRCT is giving us. So HRCT gave us the severity scoring of 14 for this patient, 14 by 25, and 7 by 25 for the 57-year-old female. So now how to approach? What is the role of imaging in COVID? So let us understand what is chest CT protocol. So what we want is a non-contrast high resolution CT chest unless CT pulmonary angiography is required to detect pulmonary embolism, and we are using low radiation as much as possible. This is something which was being criticized, and the Radiology Association of India has given a huge explanation contradicting what has been said regarding the radiation exposure, that we are not giving very high radiations, etc., etc., and the latest machines are have the capacity of giving low radiation. So CT images should be acquired during a single inspiratory breath hold. We do not even need a expiratory film. So a very minimum radiation is given for CT chest, and we are happy with the reports. So what is expected? In asymptomatics, around 46% CTs will be normal, whereas in symptomatics, 13% will be normal if done in first 5 days, and this increases to 97% positivity if done after 5 days. So what we are trying to say by this is that please do not get CTs done before day 6 or 7. And what do we get in the CTs? The term GGO, ground glass opacity. So till 1.5 years ago, most of the people had not heard of GGOs in pediatrics, because GGOs were only seen usually in idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis and interstitial lung disease, pretty uncommon condition in pediatrics. And therein I had 4 or 5 patients, and we used to look at the GGOs. So this is what is a GGO, typical GGO here. I hope my pen is visible. The red marker is there visible. Sir, is the red marker visible with the pen? Okay, I think all are mute. So, and another, okay, great, great, great. Actually, the writer part of the pen is not working. I tried it, but it went off the screen. So I thought I'll work with this marker itself. So another thing is this crazy pavement, septal thickening superimposed over GGOs. This is crazy pavement appearance. So what is crazy pavement? Basically, if you the English have cobblestones around their houses, and these stones are surrounded by some things. So this is the typical crazy pavement kind of appearance which is visible. So this has been labeled here. And consolidation here, consolidation, haziness with bronchovascular markings not seen in background, but there will be a air bronchogram. So these are the three main findings. One is, another is a halo sign wherein a vessel is surrounded by GGOs. So these are the findings which are usually visible. Again, GGOs on the periphery here. And when these GGOs increase to this size with crazy pavement, you have a picture of ARDS. Again, the slides have stuck. Slide got agree. Okay. Yeah, it's done. So don't worry, I have my son here, so he helps me out with these presentations. So CT changes over time. So what are the CT changes? How do we see them? So 0 to 5 days. This is a normal CT, the first film. Here 0 to 5 days, you see subpleural GGOs start appearing. 5 to 8 days, these GGOs are there extensively. Here. So we say that during first 5 days, please don't get a CT scan done because the changes will be minimal, they will confuse you, and the treatment will get disturbed. After that, from day 9 to 13, there is crazy paving and GGOs present. You can look at the crazy paving. Then 14 days onwards, you start seeing consolidation, which starts appearing. And after that, after day 14, it is fibrosis and subpleural bands are visible. As you can see, the bands which are becoming visible and thickening, subpleural thickening starts appearing. So then to stage, we have two kinds of scoring, CORAD scoring and severity score. The CORAD classification is a standard reporting system for patients with suspected COVID-19 infection developed for a moderate to high prevalence setting like the situation now in India. And severity scoring is the percentage of lung involved, that is lobe involvement out of 25. So I'll just discuss them both in a single slide each. CORAD scoring: 1, level of suspicion no, normal or non-infectious abnormalities; 2, again low, abnormalities consistent with infections other than COVID-19. CORAD 3 is indeterminate, unclear whether COVID-19 is present. CORAD 4, high suspicion. CORAD 5, very high, typical of COVID-19 disease. And if CORAD 6, it simply is equivalent to RT-PCR positive. The more what we usually do not see on CT scans of chest is pleural effusion. If it is present, think of something else. Train bud, think of something else. Bronchiectatic changes. Lymphadenopathy, again, think of something else. Cox, lymphomas, pericardial. In fact, I got a CT done recently. There were lymphadenopathy along with COVID changes. So I told him कि पहले COVID ठीक करा ले, फिर CT को review करना पड़ेगा. Why do you have lymphadenopathy of this significance? So again, pericardial effusion and cavitatory lung lesions, not very common. Then percentage, this is the CT severity scoring. How this severity scoring is done? There are 5 lobes in the lung. Each lobe is given a score of 5. 0 is normal. If the, 1 point is less than 5% abnormality, 2 points 5 to 25%, 3 points 3 to 50, 25 to 50%, 4 points 50 to 75%, and 5 points greater than 75% of the lobe. So each lobe is given a score of maximum score of 5, and 5 lobes therefore a score of 25. So that is the way this CT severity scoring is done. So now, can I predict clinical course on basis of imaging? So what is the CT score severity classification? Mild is less than 7, moderate is 8 to 17. So any score between 8 to 17 is moderate, and severe is more than 18. So what does it mean to me as a clinician? So a person who has a score of 8 to 17, there is a 50% chance that he'll require oxygen. And any score more than 18, there is a 97% chance that he will be requiring oxygen. And less than 7 is a mild disease, we do not need to do much. So here, so this is what is mentioned: no hypoxemia in 50% of patients with CT scores severity of 8 to 17, whereas over that it is 96% who require oxygen. So now HRs, so now again, this is what that was a rough guide for oxygenation. What do we do with these scores? So less than 8, leave it, nothing to do. HRCT score more than 8 with no clinical features, hypoxemia or fever or markers normal, and the patient is low risk, simply do intensive follow up on day-to-day basis. If the patient is, if the lung involvement is more than 50% and consolidation is present and the age is more than 50 and comorbidities are there, here you manage on case to case basis. You have to start steroids, anticoagulants and antivirals. So now coming back to Ashi, so we saw that CT score was 14, SpO2 was going down 95 from the initial 96, CRP again 18, which we had seen. The NL ratio was disturbed, D-dimer normal, CT score was 14, and there were symptoms, cough, weakness were there. So we started him on Medrol, 16 milligrams BD, enoxaparin 40 milligram OD, and close monitoring for other high risk features. Whereas the female, 57-year-old female, she had become febrile by the time we got the CT report. That was day 12, and her investigations were grossly normal. D-dimer was mildly elevated, CT score was just 7, SpO2 was 96 as before. So here we decided that no treatment is required, simply monitor this patient because the patient was a high risk patient. So now coming to the Government of India guidelines. So Government of India guidelines says anything which is asymptomatic or a mild fever with URTI goes into a mild category, and moderate category is pneumonia with SpO2 between 90 to 94 and 90 with respiratory rate of 15 to 30. So this guideline, what is wrong with this is that they do not consider a CT severity scoring, and we have seen that a CT severity scoring between 8 to 17, 50% will present with hypoxia, that is SpO2 will go below 94, and 50% will not present with hypoxia. So they will be labeled clinically as mild, but they are moderate basically. And severe SpO2 is less than 90% and respiratory more than 30 per minute. And if you look at the international guidelines, then NIH definition, so what we were considering as moderate, because our CT scores were not into consideration, is considered as severe illness here. So those having SpO2 below 94% on room air with infiltrates more than 50%, these patients may experience rapid clinical deterioration and therefore should be going into severe illness. So NIH classification, so what is moderate in our classification is severe in NIH classification. So now coming to therapeutics. So what are the therapeutics available to us after discussing the investigations? We have antivirals. In the antivirals, there is a huge list. Baloxavir, no more used. Convalescent plasma antibodies. Yes, just now I got a message that antibodies, cocktail of two antibodies has been approved, which is being marketed by Roche. It has been given emergency approval by Government of India today. These antibodies have been available in the West for last 6 months. Favipiravir, not of much use. Hydroxychloroquine, not used. Interferon, useless. Lopinavir, ritonavir, useless. Nitazoxanide, useless. Oseltamivir, doubtful. Remdesivir, yes. Ribavirin, useless. Immunomodulators, corticosteroids, this is the mainstay of treatment. IL-1 inhibitors, anakinra, not used. IL-6, tocilizumab, yes, yes. Intravenous immunoglobulin, maybe in cytokine storms. JAK inhibitors, baricitinib, may be used. A level of evidence low. Antibodies, as I have discussed here, convalescent plasma and antibodies, vitamin C, D, ivermectin, azithromycin, doxy, HUQS, which are being prescribed left, right, and center, being taken by patients, being provided by government, and some kind of COVID care kits are of no use at all. So now coming to so now what we are left with is antivirals, convalescent plasma, remdesivir, antibodies, immunomodulators, corticosteroids, JAK inhibitors, and anticoagulants. These are the drugs left for us. So now before launching into the therapy, if we understand the mechanism again, we look at the mechanism again, we'll be able to understand which drug to give and when. So when the clinical symptoms start and there are mild constitutional symptoms, there is a viral response phase. Herein, the virus is proliferating, which is the stage 1, early infection. You may have some amount of lymphopenia. Then the most important stage, that is pulmonary phase 2A and 2B. This is the stage which is the one which needs to be tackled and which will be life-saving for a lot of patients. Then there is in this stage is divided into two, 2A and 2B, no hypoxia, that is 2A, and hypoxia 2B. Then stage 3, which is a hyperinflammation phase, wherein the host inflammatory response may occur and lead to ARDS, very difficult to manage, elevated inflammatory markers, and a lot of problems. So this is the phase where there is no hypoxia and hypoxia, where you have a abnormal chest imaging. So this phase is approximately day 5 to day 7 or 8, wherein all the action which is needed has to be taken. And if you look at the medications available to us, remdesivir, the initial phase, first 5 days, the beneficial effects of remdesivir are not very clear. The problem is that 90%, more than 90% patients will not have any problem. So if you give them remdesivir, it is a wastage of the drug. and it may be of no use. From day 5 to around day 10 or 12, this drug is useful, found to be useful, and helps in rapid viral clearance. Steroids, again, we do not want to give it before day 5 at all because it prolongs the viral replication. From day 5 to day 7, benefit is unclear. If the patient is going into hypoxia, is having high grade fever, looking sick, steroids may be given. From day 7 onwards, steroids are definitely beneficial. Anticoagulants, again, from day 5 to day 14, they have a good role. So they can be started if the markers, if the inflammatory markers and imaging are in the showing that something seriously wrong is going to happen. So now look at this. So this is the stage 2A and 2B, and this is the time course, no hypoxia, and the patient is going into land into hypoxia. Now our aim is how to recognize this stage and which drugs are to be used once we recognize this stage. So any patient with persistence of fever after 5 to 7 days, high grade fever with chills and rigor, significant chest infiltrates on imaging, and deranged markers like CRP, D dimers, or falling SpO2. See, one stage is when SpO2 goes below 94. Another situation is that SpO2 was 98 or 99 at the onset of illness, but now is reaching 95. That means the SpO2 has fallen 3 to 4 points, and that is significant. That should not be ignored. We should not wait कि अब SpO2 94 के नीचे जाएगी तभी हम सोचेंगे क्या करना है. ठीक है. So any fever more than 99 degree Fahrenheit, especially with weakness and chills. So this fever I'm talking about starts on around day 2 or 3 of the illness, and then day 6 or 7 there is still fever persisting and there is weakness and chills. That means there is a problem. You have to investigate and decide a course of treatment for this patient. And any severity score of more than 8 with clinical features implies that you have to manage this patient. So again, coming back to drugs, as I was talking about antibodies can be used from day 3 to day 6 or 7. The kind of antibodies available to us was only convalescent plasma till date, but now today emergency authorization has been given to a cocktail of two monoclonal antibodies. Name it's difficult to pronounce, I've just forgotten the name. And then there is a monoclonal antibody, bamlanivimab, which is available in the West. Cocktail of two antibody, REG and COV2. So all these are available, but the only point to remember here is that they have to be given before day 6 or 7. What is happening is patient is very sick, he is on a ventilator, day 12, 13, and the treating physician says कि कहीं से plasma ले आओ, and the family is running around trying to arrange plasma. It has no role. Remdesivir, day 5 onwards, yes. So in stage 2A, if we give remdesivir, start steroids on time and anticoagulation on time, maybe we will be able to control the host inflammatory response and avoid that second B stage of hypoxia. Now coming to the drug in demand, which is thought to be a magical cure, but studies have shown that it does not have that much of an effect. I'll not quote these studies, the presentation will go very long. So what is the indication of remdesivir? What are the contraindications and what is the controversy behind it? So indication, a progressive pneumonia, as we have discussed, with minimal oxygen demand or no oxygen demand, but there is a pneumonia, CT score is 8 or 9 and the markers are deranged. The patient requires remdesivir. A high risk patient, as we have discussed, high risk criteria, significant chest infiltrates with symptoms, no oxygen requirement. Best results are used within first 12 days and should be avoided in pregnancy. eGFR less than 30, this is important, and SGOT, SGPT greater than 5 times. So around if the lab parameter is around 35 or 40, then 5 times is around 150, 200. Over that you have to avoid. Corticosteroids, indications, hypoxemia. Dose and duration depends upon severity and tapering should be done slowly. So today itself somebody was asking in a group how much to give, since how long to give, what to do with the steroid. So this is the guideline. So in moderate disease, Dexa can be used 6 milligram IV OD for 3 to 5 days, or methylpred 40 to 60 milligram for 3 to 5 days. Whereas in severe disease, dexamethasone can be given 6 milligram BD for 5 to 7 days, or methylpred 80 milligram for 5 to 7 days. A lot of people are using methylpred 80 milligram IV BD. Personally, I am using 60 BD, but a lot of people are using methylpred 80 BD, and one of my relatives is being given methylpred to the tune of 120 milligram IV BD in ICU in Delhi. I do not know such high doses are they beneficial or not, but after 80 the advantage plateaus off. And it has no use in less than 7 days unless hypoxia is present. So what is happening is, a lot of families, when they find that one of their patient attend one of their family members becomes sick, markers are deranged, doctor starts dexamethasone, then other four members they start dexa on their own कि एक prescription है तो सही सबको दे दो dexa. This has happened to a lot of families. I have seen it personally. So this should not be done. It is not required in less than 7 days unless there is hypoxia. If patient develops hypoxia on day 5, give steroids, we find that there is a immediate improvement of 3 or 4 percentage points on the SpO2. So in practice, the main criteria is hypoxia. Use it for 7 to 10 days and taper it over 10 to 14 days. So this is the way steroid has to be used. So now coming to coagulopathy and thromboinflammation. So there is a thrombosis and inflammation, and these two go hand in hand. And in our elderly population, because of age and lipid fat deposition, their endotheliums are damaged, and these can lead to a hyperinflammatory response and sudden prothrombotic stage, leading to coagulation in their blood vessels, leading to a lot of complications. That is Virchow's triad. So what anticoagulant therapy, again indication is clinical risk of thrombosis as decided by lab markers. Dose and duration depends upon severity. We have two regimens, prophylactic and therapeutic, and duration is 2 to 6 weeks. What is happening is, people start off with Clexan, give it for 5 days and stop it. So it has to be continued for 2 to 6 weeks. So prophylactic dose of low molecular weight heparin, if no contraindications, enoxaparin 40 milligrams subcutaneous daily, once a day. And in severe disease, the dosage is 40 milligram BD subcutaneously twice a day, if not at a high risk of bleeding. So now again we continue with our family of Ashi, the two, uh, one gentleman and a lady. So 77-year-old male, diabetic, day 8, cough, weakness persisted, HbA1c 6, started on oral methylpred and enoxaparin. CRP was 18, fever and SpO2 96. Medrol started was 24, enoxaparin 40. Day 12 CRP was rising and Medrol dose was increased. Patient had become asymptomatic. SpO2 was 94, so just borderline. It was falling. Enoxaparin is being given. Day 16, CRP is now fallen 6. Afebrile, SpO2 back to 96. What do we do here? We start tapering off Medrol and continue enoxaparin 40 for 10 days, and then shift to oral for next 4 weeks. So to conclude, the most important aim of our therapy initially is risk stratification. So is the person at high risk? What are the level of symptoms? Does he require immediate admission, or should we observe him at home? 85% patients do not need any treatment. Monitoring is the key to success. So we have to maintain the charts of the patient, keep a constant watch, talk to him ideally daily, and see what is happening to the symptoms. Do we need to do investigations? All patients with simple URI like manifestations do not require investigations. Laboratory and radiology has to be used judiciously. Our labs are overburdened. Reports are coming after 2 days. So we have to use those facilities judiciously so the people really need get those investigations done. The test should be interpreted in clinical context. Both go hand in hand. And the most important, recognition of early pulmonary stage before significant hypoxia is the key to success. So we want to find out that will this patient land into hypoxia? We have to preempt that diagnosis beforehand. And if we feel that he's going to land into hypoxia as per our lab parameters, the clinical features, and our CT scoring, we have to start aggressive therapy, and these patients will come out. Remdesivir recipients should be watched for pneumonia and development of hypoxemia. Remdesivir is not a magical drug, and it will not lead to. It does not mean that if you start remdesivir, patient will not land into pneumonia. Thank you. I'm stopping sharing.